So I want to talk about this book I read. It's called Of Human Bondage by William Somerset Maugham. Also, the cover, it's so beautiful. Anyway, so this video is not really a book review, but it's more like this book brought up so many interesting questions on art and philosophy and suffering and life. And so we follow this protagonist from when he's 10 years old to when he's like 30. So you see this protagonist like moving through life and having their first heartbreak, their humiliations, their rejections, everything that they faced. And it's just something that I think is very important for artists also to consider, the kind of questions that I've come across in this book. One of the main subplots of this book is actually a love story, if you can call it that. But that's not even as interesting as like all of the questions that this book brings up in terms of life and growing up and suffering and art. So that's what I want to talk about today. So let's get into it. Very briefly, the story begins with Philip, who's our protagonist, and he's an orphan. He's lost his parents. So he is moved to his aunt and uncle's house. That's where his childhood takes place. And it's a very lonely sort of childhood. The vicar, who's his uncle, is quite strict. He has a very strict Christian Catholic upbringing. He's in a boys' school, and that is not fun for anyone as a child. But also, he is someone who has a clubfoot. He has a disability, and because of the bullying he faces for that, and because of the fact that he is an orphan, his childhood is not the best. So there's this one part I want to read out, which is when he's sort of growing up and he's realizing that he has like a consciousness, he has thoughts of his own, he has a personality, he is seeing and recognizing himself as a separate individual being who's apart from the kind of groups of boys that are there in his school. So I'm going to read this out. Beneath his painful shyness, something was growing up within him, and obscurely he realized his personality. But at times, it gave him odd surprises. He did things he knew not why, and afterwards, when he thought of them, found himself all at sea. So the reason why I think that this is relevant for even adults is that when you go through things for the first time, when you're, a young adult, when you're a child, teenager, all of that, it's not a time when you know a lot about yourself because these things are happening to you for the first time. And so you have these responses, you have these kind of impulse reactions, and then later on in life, you face a lot more humiliations, rejections, heartbreaks, and you kind of become a solid person. You have a much better sense of your identity and personhood. But the drawback of that is that you also become rigid and you become fixed, and you think like, okay, this is just the sort of person I am, and if they don't like it, they can go away. And that's just not the best thing for relationships, for self-growth. And I think that if we, like, these few lines just made me think that if we as adults also had the same kind of surprise and curiosity for the things we do as we did when we were kids, when everything was so immediate and urgent and like painful and big, every experience was so, this is consuming me right now. Those kind of reactions don't happen anymore because we've gone through more of life now. But if we just responded to those situations with more of like self-curiosity of like, okay, why did I say that thing, why did I do that thing, we'll realize that there is always room for growth. It's not like childhood and young adulthood, and then when you're an adult, it's like you've had all the growth that you need to have, and you're just gonna, stop growing now, because we'll have like a few jobs for the rest of our life, and we'll have probably like some partnerships and maybe like a marriage or a few, but everything becomes constrained and everything becomes very defined. So we also constrain ourselves, but there is always so much room for growth, especially when you have an attitude of like curiosity and why do I feel this way, why do I think this way, why did I say that, why do I act this way, not from a place of self criticism, just to have a sort of open curiosity. So that kind of childlike sense of wonder can always be applied well into adulthood. So the next part of the book is when Philip is around 17, 18 years old. He decides that he's had enough of this kind of strict Catholic upbringing that he's been having. He has been questioning how much he, believes in God, or like there's been so much fear of sin, of God, and he's been instilled with all of these very strict beliefs, and so he's not really had much of a chance to explore who he is because he doesn't have any close friends. It's just the uncle and aunt at his place. Uncle doesn't talk to him much, doesn't have any parents, doesn't have any real intimate friendships, and so he says, I want to explore, I want to see what more of the world there is to see. And so he moves to Germany. He makes the decision to move to Germany. So he's still studying there and he's learning a few languages and math and all of that, but this is where he believes that his life will change. So what happens is that he his life does change in some ways. He meets interesting people. He's meeting and talking to women for the first time. He's meeting people of like different cultures, different religions, and he's having these questions with different people on morality, on God, and he's realizing that he doesn't necessarily believe in God. And so this is like a huge change for him. This is the first time that he's realizing this. And so in these ways, he's discovering more of life. But what happens is that he doesn't feel like life is still opening up in the ways that he thought it would, in the ways that books portray it to be. Like, okay, like life is going to open up for you when you're in your, young adulthood and late teens and all of that. And that's just not happening with him. So again, I want to read out this passage here. Okay, this is great. He did not know how wide a country, arid and precipitous, must be crossed before the traveler through life comes to an acceptance of reality. It is an illusion that youth is happy, an illusion of those who have lost it. But the young know they are wretched, for they are full of the truthless ideals which have been instilled into them. And each time they come in contact with the real, they are bruised and wounded. It looks as if they were victims of a conspiracy, for the books they read, ideal by the necessity of selection, and the conversation of their elders, who look back upon the past through a rosy haze of forgetfulness, prepare them for an unreal life. They must discover for themselves that all they had read and all they have been told are lies, and each discovery is another nail driven into the body on the cross of life. The strange thing is that each one who has gone through that bitter disillusionment adds to it in his turn, unconsciously, by the power within him which is stronger than himself. So good. It's like so good. Like, again, so this guy, this author, right? I don't particularly love his writing. Like, there's no great, wielding of words, or like it's not like the prose is very pretty or atmospheric, or like just the writing style. I'm not attracted to it at all. In fact, a lot of times I think that he does not go deep enough, because there's so much ground to cover, right? We're seeing Philip through like 20 years of his life, and it's fit into like 700 pages. So he doesn't go deep enough, I feel, into certain important parts of like Philip's life. They're kind of summed up by the narrator, instead of us getting like inner monologues of like what Philip thinks and how he thinks and perceives the world. But like sometimes this author really like hits the nail on the head. Anyway, so I think that part that I just read out was about like how as adults we think that like, okay, like this was a very nice rosy time in our lives, but that's just because now we can look back and see like there was so much potential and there was so much experience to be had, and life could branch out in all these like interesting ways. But when we are young, we don't realize like how quickly time is going to pass away, and we don't make those decisions, and we're worried about dumb things because they're happening to us for the first time, so they seem so big. But we're just doing things based on like what adults are telling us to do, what our friends are doing, what people around us are doing, and time passes so quickly. And the interesting thing is that like this is a cycle, like it just keeps going on. Like then the next generation is going to do this exact same thing, and you are going to look back at them and think that they are having the time of their lives because you now have responsibilities and like a family and like a job and like that you probably hate, and like, man, adulthood is fun, huh? But yeah, so I think that this passage was really cool because it's just nostalgia and it's kind of beautiful also. Okay, so now it's getting really cool for Philip, because Philip is like, Germany is not interesting enough for me, I'm gonna go to Paris, right? So he decides, or he's kind of influenced by his friend, he decides that he's gonna go to Paris and he's gonna try to make it as a painter, because like he tried his hand at painting a few times and his friend was like, oh, you're so good, go to Paris, live the life, live the romantic life, the artist life. And so he's like, I'm gonna go. And so he goes. So after like some fighting with his uncle, he convinces his uncle, and then he goes to Paris. So in Paris, he meets a lot of interesting people. Again, I'm not like going to go into the story much, but I want to talk about like these three primary characters who he meets in Paris, who I think are like very interesting because they also serve as like a contrast to Philip. Philip takes each of them as a sort of warning sign, and then he develops his own sort of thought process and personality, and he makes his own decisions. But in the story, I think that these three characters definitely portray different types of artists who are very common in like reality in the real world. So the first one is Miss Price. I think her name is Miss Fanny Price, or maybe that's another character. Was that a Jane Austen character? Anyway, so now Philip is in art school and he meets this woman called Fanny Price, or Price. Let's just call her Miss Price. Anyway, Miss Price is someone who is very dedicated to her art, and she's very confident and she has a lot of willpower. But we see through the story that that's even that does not end up serving her because she's stuck to the rules, and she practices a lot as well, and she studies the painters that came before her. She studies all the right painters, the ones that are like taught at school. She does everything the right way, and let's just say that things do not end up working out for her. So I think what's interesting is that, like, there was this one scene where Miss Price takes Philip to like this really famous museum, and so she is showing him the paintings which are to be looked at. And there's like one scene when they pass by a window, and so Philip is like, oh my god, look at those like gardens, let's just like stop and pause here, because like the wind and the sunlight and the gardens, everything's really beautiful, and I want to take in this moment and enjoy this moment. And so then Miss Price is like, why did you come to the museum if you just want to enjoy this like day or whatever, and we have a lot of paintings to look at, so let's go. And I think that moment, or like there was another moment in the museum when like Philip wants to look at other paintings, and Miss Price is like, no, don't look at those, like look at the ones that I'm telling you to look at, and like learn from those, these are the things you should be looking at. I think what happens with artists is that we don't often have the sort of a verve, like the sort of courage, or at least initially we don't, to develop like our own instincts. And that can be a huge drawback, because if you're only looking at the crates, you're only looking at, okay, what is to be studied. And in this case, Miss Price used to practice a lot too. She would like just keep working on her art, but she would not take in feedback from anyone else. No one thought that her art was good, but she wouldn't pay attention, and she would just keep making it. But the thing is that she had no instincts of her own. She was just following like the rules and the orders and what the professor would teach her and everything that she'd been taught. So I think that along with practice, along with willpower, along with like, you know, self-confidence, what is so important is to develop your own instincts and look at things from different angles and consume different types of art, like not just the stuff that you're naturally drawn to, but like explore other genres, explore other forms of art, and don't be rigid. So like what Philip does so well, the reason why I like him so much is that he goes for risks. Like he explores as well. He moved to Germany, he moved to Paris, and he does take risks, and he does have that like seeking like the thrill, seeking adventure, seeking experiences. But he doesn't just do what he's told. There is this in every art sphere, in every like field, in every circle, there's a lot of pressure, you know, people kind of judging you for your tastes or your work. But Philip is very like not ashamed of what he's naturally drawn to. There's almost this fear of what's popular, right? In every field, every genre, you'll see that there's this fear of like the popular, and there's almost like this pretentiousness, and you want to be different, you want to be seen as like someone with elevated tastes and skills and all of that. But Philip is so observant, and what he does best is that he observes and he listens, and he's genuinely excited about what other people are saying. Like he's genuinely interested in what his friends say, but he doesn't believe them. He's not like, he doesn't sway easily, and so he takes in things and he turns them over in his mind, and he comes to his own conclusions. So I think that's really important. The next character we see is Clutton. So Clutton is the perfectionist, right? So we all know this person, we've all been this artist. The perfectionist, Clutton, is someone who, he is sort of an extreme version of the perfectionist. The thing is that Clutton is actually really good. We just never see evidence of that in the story. So there are 4 friends: Philip, Clutton, Lawson, someone else, Flanagan. There's a 4th. So the 4 of them are going to this art school, they're studying, they have conversations and meals together and all of that. Nobody's ever seen Clutton's work. One of them, Lawson, has seen Clutton's work, and he says something like, okay, there's this really beautiful painting, but then Clutton tore that out. So what Clutton does is he, like each work of his, he'll grow frustrated with, and he'll tear it up, and he'll only keep a portion of that which was in his mind like good enough. And so then he would not have a single full completed piece to show for himself that like, this is my work. So what happens with this sort of perfectionist is that, first of all, I would say never destroy your work. Like never ever destroy your work. This is a very literal extreme version of the perfectionist, but your taste will always be above your ability. Literally, you will write a piece today that you're gonna love, and tomorrow you'll sit at the laptop and then you're just gonna hate it. You're gonna be like, what did I write? And that's completely okay. That's a good thing. What was interesting about this character was that Clutton had really reached this place inside himself, but he was going too much inside himself. So he reached somewhere where he could not even describe what he wanted to paint. He could only like access it within himself, but it wouldn't come out, right? It wouldn't, because he was not getting it, because he was not finishing anything. So artists, when we become perfectionistic, we don't finish a single piece of work. The issue with that is you're not completing the round, right? You're not completing the loop. You have to close the loop before you get to the next loop. So this acceptance of like, this is my ability right now, and it's not gonna be better than this until I practice more, and then over time it's gonna improve. That acceptance is very important, because you just have to accept that the art is a long game, and it's gonna take years of not just you like consuming different types of art, but also having like life experiences and practicing all the time. That is when, after years probably, you'll get to where you wanted to get to, and even then you're not going to be satisfied. So just accepting that there's always going to be a discrepancy between what you're producing and what you think is good enough. So that. Now the next character is Hayward. So Hayward is the same friend who Philip had in Germany, who convinced him to go to Paris and become a painter. So Hayward is the third type of artist. Hayward is the collector. What this means is that he is afraid of practice. So Clutton was very afraid of rejection, afraid of failure, but this guy like won't even practice, right? He won't even put in the work, and he will collect books and he will not practice. But so this type of artist is the one who will, yeah, like you're watching films, you're having conversations about the books you read, the books you like, what you don't like. And again, all of that is great. All of that is very necessary. There are literally two things that you need to do as an artist. You need to read or watch whatever, and you need to do the thing. So I think doing the thing is very important, because Hayward is again an extreme example of the kind of character who doesn't like do the art at all. The other thing about Hayward is that he's an idealist, and he has very romantic notions about art, about life itself. And so you can never have a serious like conversation with him, because he always sees the world through that like rose-colored glass or whatever. So again, like I'll read out this description of Hayward, which is, give me a minute. The companionship of Hayward was the worst possible thing for Philip. He was a man who saw nothing for himself, but only through a literary atmosphere. And he was dangerous because he had deceived himself into sincerity. He honestly mistook his sensuality for romantic emotion, his vacillation for the artistic temperament, and his idleness for philosophic calm. His mind, vulgar in its effort at refinement, saw everything a little larger than life size, with the outlines blurred in a gold mist of sentimentality. He lied and never knew that he lied, and when it was pointed out to him, said that lies were beautiful. He was an idealist. Again, like the characters in this book are so well developed, and all of them are so interesting. So I think, yeah, that's just like another dangerous type of. This is a kind of stretch that I'm making between the kind of artist I'm talking about in Hayward. You want it to be a romantic process, waiting for the muse, and you'll only write when there's inspiration or when you feel like writing, or you'll only make art when you feel like making art. And the truth is that most of the time it's just gonna be boredom, or it's gonna be forcing yourself, or like some variation of those two things. And it's also gonna be hard. You're gonna love your work one day, hate it the next. And again, all of these are just variations of like the same thing, which is that it's not a romantic process. I think the notion of the romantic part of it comes from the fact that you need it so much. Like as an artist, you have that need. You want to express, you want to communicate, you want to understand what's happening to you, what's happening to the world. And there's so much need and desire behind that. So I think that automatically translates in our heads to like, oh, but then this must also feel this way. And then we're faced with the reality that it doesn't feel that way. It's often boring, and we have to do very unromantic things like wake up early or sleep late or time block and make time for it in our calendars, and it's like whatever works for you. But the main point I'm trying to make here is that practice is a very important part of getting to where you want to be as an artist. It's not about waiting around for inspiration. Your schedule can look like whatever you want it to look like. You can make time every day for writing, or you can have a word count, or you can sit down to write a few times a week, whatever that is. But above all, I think practice needs to be key. So there's this other quote that someone says to Philip about Hayward, which really scared me and made me realize how much I need to practice. So maybe you'll do the same for you. He always admires the right thing, whatever the right thing is, and one of these days he's going to write a great work. Think of it, there are 147 great works reposing in the bosoms of 147 great men. And the tragic thing is that not one of those 147 great works will ever be written. And yet the world goes on. Scary as fuck. So practice is what I'm saying. Right, so the other thing I want to talk about is that, like I was saying earlier, there's this like pretentiousness and this fear of being perceived, you know, the fear of like having your tastes judged, having your art judged. And I think over there what's important is that accept that you can't be different and want to fit in at the same time. And so be like Philip, be very confident in like what you like, what you don't like, and think about why you like things, reflect on why you don't like things, because that kind of identification is going to help you to make your own art so much better. When you realize why you like certain art, why you're drawn to certain things, what you don't like about the kinds of art that you don't like. And again, like not being rigid. So again, explore like different kinds of genres, different kinds of artists, different art forms, you know, music and painting and writing and film, all of it. Explore like not just stuff that you are fond of, but stuff that you would not ordinarily read or watch. And once you identify what you like, then go deep and like discover more of that, take in more of that. That is where your own sort of style could develop more, but always be open to different opinions. I think the worst kind of artist is the one who's very rigid, because they don't like accept other people's points of view, whether that's about art they like or their own art. Like being kind of open is very important as an artist, because each perspective, each viewpoint is just going to add to your own knowledge, and your own knowledge is where you make more art from. To just be kind of open, I think, to what you're not naturally drawn to, or actually pay more attention to the things that you immediately kind of close yourself against, is like a cool way to get over being rigid. So the next thing I want to talk about is Clutton says this one thing in the book. He's like reviewing a painting that Lawson made, and he's like, oh, form is good, your style, your technique, everything is good, this is a good painting, but I don't like it. And so Lawson is like, why? And Clutton says, you haven't arrived at the intention of the soul of what you're trying to create. Which sounds like very profound and very deep, but honestly it is so simple. So arriving at the intention of the soul of your subject basically just means, like I said, just being open, not being rigid, looking at things from different angles, different points of view, asking a lot of questions, questioning your own prejudgment, preconceptions, journaling, observing, people watching. There are so many ways to be open. Like, okay, suppose you're watching a movie and then it's like, I don't like this scene, or I don't like this dialogue, I don't like the writing. Okay, like, why don't you like it? What could have made it better? Like, asking questions, getting to the intention of something. If you want to write about something, get to the intention of the subject first. So like the show Severance, I was listening to the Severance podcast, and so the executive producer of that show, she said that when she was accepting scripts, she said that what she was looking for in a script was something that had never been done before, but that was still human at its core. And those are the only two things you need, which is very easy to say, but this doesn't mean that you have to create something new and original. So everything that you will ever want to make art about, art for that subject already exists. There are so many artists who have made art on love and hate and friendship and rejection and all of these things. There will never be a novel subject for you to make art about. The only thing that you can do is to play around with what you are creating. So don't go for the obvious. What that means is look beyond the surface, look at the intention of the thing, ask a lot of questions, go with the subject from a lot of different angles. Don't be rigid in with anything. Like, don't have these strict rules of like, needs to be this genre. Like, if you look at Severance itself, like the thriller parts have been done before. There have been so many thrillers that have been made. The concept in the show of like splitting the identity or two selves, or however you want to put it, that's been done a million times before. Evil organization with like mysterious things going on, that has been done before. Like every single thing, office humor, workplace humor, has been done before, but it's the way that they put all of these things together, because at the core of it, the show is very human. Like, you feel those things that the characters are feeling even when they're not doing much or there's not much happening in the story. So I think that if you want to do something in a novel way, you want to do something in a creative way, like the baseline has to be that you've really gone beyond the surface and you've understood the intention And so like Philip's contradiction to what Clutton says, that go at the intention of the soul. So Philip is like, the people are made of a mass of contradictions, so how do you figure out the intention of the soul? Like people are made of so many different things. So which is why it's important to not see in black and white, but like whatever you're studying, whatever your subject is, look at it from as many different perspectives as you can. And at its core, it should speak to people, it should connect to people's emotions, and at its core it should be human. The last thing I want to talk about is the balance between making art for yourself and making art for others. So the reason I'm saying balance is because I don't think, at least for me, there's never going to be a part of me that will only ever make art for me, in the sense that I want other people to like it, I want other people to have it impact them in some way, I want other people to have read my work and, you know, it reminded them of something, or it made them change an opinion about something, or it taught them something, or it made them just reflect on their own life the way that this book is making me do. And I think that's something that a lot of artists want, or maybe all artists want. So there's never gonna be a part of you that's like, okay, like there's this 100% purity of I am only making art for me. And the reason why, if you have that kind of mindset of like, I don't care what people think, you know, I don't care about feedback, or if you're someone who rejects feedback, the reason why I think that that's not the best thing to do as an artist is because as an artist, there are two reasons you're making art, right? Either you want to understand something, or you have understood something and you want to express it. And for both those things, like let's say you make a book, like let's say you write a book, it's done, you expressed whatever you wanted to express, it turned out great. But like now imagine the world was empty and there was no one to share this with. You would just be like terribly lonely, and eventually like the book will not have meaning for you anymore, because if this world was full of people, then after a few months of interactions with other people, conversations with other people, not even necessarily about this book, but just like more experiences that you would have had in life, you would think about this book very differently. But if there were no humans to show it to, there were no humans for you to talk to and for you to make sense of the world with, if there were not experiences and learnings that you were having, which you can only have with other people, in environments with other people, you would likely have the same opinion about the work that you created, the book that you wrote, even after a few months, because nothing would have happened, there would have been no stimuli, there would have been no growth as such. And so that piece of work stops making sense, or even if it makes sense, it doesn't really serve you anymore. So the thing is that when we make art, like I think the most that you can get out of art is in the moment you're creating it. That is the moment when it's like at its purest form, the connection between you and your book or your film is like really strong, it's at the strongest. And that's really beautiful. But I think that the moment you've written the book, you finish the story, you've made the film, it's out of you, because you have produced everything that you could, you've given it all you could, it's out of you. But the next step is always feedback, it's always talking to people, because let's say someone read what you wrote and they come up to you and they're like, hey, I don't agree with like your opinions about this particular thing in that you wrote in the book. And if you're not rigid, right, if you accept that, that would actually expand to your overall view about the subject, and you would actually grow, and then that would in some way merge in your brain with like other things and contribute and like inform the next piece of work or the next piece of work. And obviously there is a downside to taking other people's opinions too seriously, and you should always know that like there is a balance, and what feedback is relevant to your work and what is not, what is just someone else having different taste. But I think that feedback is so important, because if you are just in your head and you're in yourself and you're not getting any sort of outside perspective, there's not much you can do from there, there's not much growth that you can have from there. So seeking feedback would be like my last and final point. Whoever it is, if it's a friend, family member, not just the people or the masters in your field, but also like other humans who don't necessarily practice your art, but they are your audience, you know, get their opinion. And not everything needs to be taken seriously, not everything, not every piece of feedback even has to be accepted, but pay attention to the ones that bother you the most, or pay attention to the ones that hurt the most, because on the other side of those feelings of rejection and hurt and like I'm not good enough and this is what I've made is not good enough, on the other side of that is growth, because you will think about that the next time you're sitting down to write or film or whatever. And we're social animals for a reason. Like, obviously, the validation and other people telling you that your art helped them, all of that feels great, and that's not something to feel bad about. Like, it's good, take in that validation, you deserve it, that's great. But always, like art and humans, it's a two-way street. Like, we don't just learn from art, but we also learn from others to make that art. And so yeah, that's my final thing to say here. Okay, so I might make a part 2 about this. There is so much more that this book talks about. We have reached maybe like 1/3 of the novel by now. There's so much more I want to talk about, so I think I will make a part 2, maybe even part 3 video on this book. So stay tuned if you're interested in that, because there's so much more to think about with this book in terms of like the heartbreak, the struggle, the just life that Philip goes through, and I think it's very relevant to all of us. So that's it for this video. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye.